Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I'm preparing to give some worms some food. This food is like the basic fare, the typical stuff that you see me feeding in my wormery. Kitchen scraps for the most part. Banana peel, lettuce, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, carrot peelings, cucumbers, coffee obviously as always. And the bins that need to be fed today are the European nightcrawlers. They're the ones down here in the middle, on the left, the two bins side by side. So I'm going to bring them out here one at a time, drop in some food. Hopefully we'll find some happy and healthy European nightcrawlers. So let's get to work. Okay, now let's see, which one is this? This is the older, January 1st. The other one started, not January, June 1st. The other one's June 8th, a week later. So what we normally see is a little collection of dead insects right underneath where the spider's web was. And something we don't normally see is a kamikaze worm getting itself stranded out there on the top surface. I don't really see that very often, thank goodness. Did notice it on one of my outdoor systems yesterday. Now this one, I think this is the one that has the greater number of worms in it. Yeah, it's coming back to me. I remember people even saying, hey, if you've got two European nightcrawlers almost the same age, it's definitely an interesting side-by-side experiment to be able to manage them equally for a while. So you can kind of compare and contrast the bins to one another. But this bin having so many more worms in it, or at least what appears to be so many more worms, seems to have the obvious advantage. So just going to plow through here a little bit just to get a sense of how things look. Got a lot of castings. I believe these bins are somewhere in the 80-day range or thereabouts. The material's getting a little bit compacted and is a little bit damp on the bottom, so I think this tilling up probably does it some good. At least break up some of these chunks that are getting a little bit harder. Not that they're a big problem, because they're basically all castings anyway. Just seems like a little bit of airflow wouldn't hurt. But yeah, this stuff's coming along really nice. If it was a little bit drier, it wouldn't clump like this, and it would just all flow, I think. So that means the moisture is pretty good in here, as is. Maybe we'll just do something along those same lines over on this side. Just a little bit of a check on the very lowest material. If it seems a little clumpy, maybe help bust it up a little bit. Yeah, very nice. Material's definitely coming along good. There's also chunks of stuff within it. I don't know what this is. Maybe just some wadded up paper. Hard to tell. All right, cool. So a lot of times we go straight for the previous feeding area, expecting that that's where we're going to find the greatest number of worms. Today, I don't know. Maybe I dug really deep in my first handful and I started feeling the stuff on the bottom feeling a little bit. Maybe a little more dense than it needs to be. And some of this stuff just not crumbling as readily as it could by being a little bit damp. It's not bad, but it does tell me that I probably don't want to go too crazy adding a lot of excess moisture to a system like this. Maybe even give this bin a little more opportunity to breathe, if possible. Just some of the things that go through my head while I'm checking the system out. Finding a lot of the same. It's very consistent throughout the entire bin. More of these chunks kind of breaking up pretty easily because they are mostly castings at this point. I see lots of baby worms. Yeah, there's babies all over the place, especially in this section that I just sort of upturned. Okay. Something of a disruptive check-in on this system. But I think it's time to give them their food and let them get back to the peace and quiet they were enjoying till I got here. A couple old things I found was that mango seed there, as well as another one. Other things like these pieces of corn cob bits. They're here and there. I keep bumping into them. But they are very fragile at this point. After maybe a month and a half of being here in the bin, they're coming along quite nicely. Pretty good for corn cob. Because if you ever tried composting a whole corn cob into one of your worm bins, then you'll know that it takes forever. So I guess we're gonna go follow the common theme lately, which is to be nice and generous with the bedding. So let me bring over a handful of newspaper bits here. One thing I've been doing lately with the newspaper bits is trying to kind of mix it up with something so the paper doesn't clump up like you saw a couple examples of there a moment ago. Here and there I run into this clump of something, and I don't know if I've got an example of it near here, but we did actually look at one a moment ago, you know, where it's just a big wad of paper. I like to try to keep all of the materials in the bin nice and loose and unclumped if possible. Yeah, a number of the things that I bumped into along the way here while I was plowing through was another one of these corn cob bits. I guess just sort of probing around, trying to see if I could find large chunks of anything that would do better down in the feeding area rather than sitting out on the surface. And these two mango pits are good candidates for that. Get them down into the feeding area. And then we could dump in today's feeding. I got a pretty good amount here. It's all starting to thaw, so it is best that I just hustle and get this food into the bin before it starts to turn to mush out here. This here is something, I guess it was maybe a soup green or something that has been cooked. So it's a pretty good sized chunk of veggie matter, but it's frozen, and I don't really, I guess I could probably chip it apart if I really wanted to. But let's also throw in a little bit of coffee for these little guys. Since I only bought one coffee down here, and I do want to feed two bins, we'll say what's here, what remains for the other bin. And that should make it into a pretty fair split, I think. Although I believe this bin probably has a lot more worms in it, so well, hopefully we're giving them a good adequate meal here. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of this pulverized eggshell on top of the food to serve as grit to help the worms in their consumption of the food. And you know what, let's keep on the theme of covering up with the old stuff, the nice seasoned materials. Stuff all at this point would probably be better classified as a food item rather than bedding. All the stuff that's been sitting around here aging and getting nice and primed for worm consumption. Alright, well, we're almost covered up, but that's what I got a supply of leaves for, to replenish what we've removed. It's all that nice leaf cover that we found when we first arrived. This stuff was really nice. Great stuff to include along with the food. And in its place, we could just come in with a few handfuls of some fresh materials. But you know, bins like this, nearing the age of 100, might be one of the last times I would want to consider using fresh leaves with all these sticks that need time to break down too. So going forward, maybe they won't get as many leaves as they had in the past. But for now, I think we're going to just go status quo on what we've been doing in these bins for the most part. So let's cover it back up, showing us where we last fed with this kind of feeding zone indicator. These pieces of paper are also helping nicely with keeping the moisture in. And then on top I had this piece of cardboard. So I mean, As I said earlier, the material did seem a little damp, but not overly. And now that we've turned it and aerated it, and we've even dropped in some more dry stuff, for now, instead of making any sort of drastic changes, I'm going to kind of treat that as just an observation for now. And I think aerating it will be plenty to try to bring it back down to a more fine dryness level so the material flows more readily. So let's bring out the other bin and get that one fed, and we'll be finished. Okay, so you might recognize this one with the soiled wall. This is the bin that I sort of classified a little differently when I placed it into my tracking spreadsheet. Every other bin lists as having been populated. So it's kind of like a bin that you built in advance of bringing the worms over. Let the bin sit around and get primed, and then you introduce the worms. So I've always launched off new bins making the statement that I've populated it with worms, but in this case the bin was already populated. What I really did in order to bring it back to sort of square one and start it off fresh was pretty much swap out all the bedding. So the worms were sort of, you know, left in the system, and all the material that they'd been in was sort of swapped out. So I treated this as sort of a bedding replenishment, sort of a migration, if you will, if it's even a migration. Nothing migrated, nobody migrated, just the old castings got migrated out and some fresh bedding got migrated in. So we already bumped into a couple worms. This bin being, I believe, quite a bit smaller in population. But I think, you know what, let's do a quick check. It's also a little bit younger. Yeah, I guess we're going to spot a lot more uncomposted bedding down here. But then again, it's only a week difference in ages. Although a large population in the bin could really do a lot more in terms of converting compostable materials into castings than a lightly populated bin. So a bin like this seems like it's doing nicely. Worms hanging out in most sections of the material. I went right down into the corner here. Lots of castings developing, but also much more than we saw in the other bin. A lot of unbroken down material mixed in with it. So a little bit behind. Kind of interesting to watch it try to catch up to its other bin. Although that bin, I don't know, with the fewer worms in here, we might not see that happen as far as catching up. We did actually talk about maybe transplanting some of the worms out of that other system into this one to try to level the playing field. So here's some of that paper that's clumped up together, stuff I'm trying to avoid have happen. So I guess after 11 days in here with the fewer population, I wonder if we're going to find many leftovers. Well, I guess it makes sense to find this leftover avocado. This thing's been in here for quite some time now. It seems like the worms are working it down inside. Everywhere I look inside of it, I can see worms doing their thing. I'm trying to remember if there was other avocados. Maybe, yeah, here's a half of one. Obviously going to get broken down a lot more quickly. Let's bring this little guy back. Sometimes these little guys get a little disturbed with me rummaging around through here, and they start to bail out. I make sure I don't let any of them end up on the table in a dry and dangerous spot. Here too, these big clumps of paper. That's what I'd like to see not happen so much. You know, I kind of come and go on my opinion of how many worms are in certain systems. Based on last week's check-in, to me it seemed like there was just so many more in the other bin, but every handful of material that I check out has multiple worms in it. So if this bin actually has a smaller population, I'm sure it's going to do its best to try to catch up. Because I see lots and lots of worms in here now. Came in here thinking that I don't need to have as much food as I had for the other one. You know what? Let's finish what we started here. kind of tilt up the bottom of this bin too, just to kind of compare apples to apples a little bit. I found pretty similar results. Perhaps not as damp down there, which makes sense, I guess. But hopefully not going to become overly dry with me having just blended in a whole bunch of dry materials into it. Alright guys, let's get this over with so we don't have so much of a sense of disruption. The worms don't like it. Same story here. I'm going to feed very similar. I guess in quantity maybe it'll be just a little tiny bit less. Same as before, we're going to start trying to see if we can prevent that matting of paper and clumping of paper by giving this paper a little blend in with some other materials here. Start getting these older chunks of food that we already found from previous feedings. This may be going back on, I don't even know, a couple months at this point. Surprising how long it's taking. And there was another avocado shell. So let's blend in just a little bit more, and then we could plop in the fresh food. Alrighty. These guys are going to get the coffee too. And we'll just dump it in, because then we could still use this filter as sort of a rag to get all the little remnants out of here instead of leaving them behind. That's good. Spread this stuff out here. It's like the butt end of a head of lettuce. Some more, what's this? Don't even know. Yeah, Brussels sprouts pieces. This, I don't know though. It's kind of frozen together. Perhaps cauliflower. Alright, let's get everything in here spread out a bit. And here too, a little grit can't hurt. And then we'll cover up with this nice coffee filter. This coffee filter being so close by the food and being covered up and everything will probably go to shreds in no time, as opposed to this one that sits out on the surface as kind of almost like a decoration. We treat it as our feeding zone indicator, just to tell us where we last fed, and since we usually feed down the middle, it's not so hard to figure out where you last fed. But we've usually got some sort of a marker showing us where the last feeding occurred, just in case we deviate from the norm, which is to, in my place at least, to just place the food down the middle. Not very exciting. So here we go. This is pretty nice looking bin here. Nice little injection of carbon, a little fresh bedding boost down underneath the food. And since we just used up a bunch of the old seasoned leaves that were in here from before, let's do a replenishment in here too. A lot of nice fine stuff in here. Okay. Keep looking around thinking, geez, did I forget something? Because I always seem to forget something, but hopefully I didn't this time. I think we've got everything taken care of and all of the bases covered. So all I've got left here to do is just to kind of cover up and put things away, maybe get a few things cleaned up. But I'm not going to waste your time with that. That's boring. Before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Have a great day.